The wind rushed past as Marcus Williams rode his motorcycle down the open road, the deep hum of the engine blending with the late afternoon sounds of the city. The air was warm, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't weaving through traffic. He was just riding, his mind at ease, his thoughts lost somewhere between the rhythm of the road and the freedom of the ride. Then suddenly, flashing red and blue lights filled his mirrors. His heart dropped. Marcus knew this feeling. Every black man who had ever been pulled over knew this feeling. That split second of dread, that tiny hesitation before you reach for your blinker, the unshakable thought, "What now?" He pulled over smoothly, stopping his bike at the side of the road. He turned off the engine, exhaled slowly, and kept his hands visible, resting lightly on the handlebars. Just like his mother always told him. Just like his father had warned him. Never make sudden moves. Keep calm. Be polite. Just get home safe. The officer stepped out of the patrol car, adjusting his belt as he approached. Tall, built like a man who had spent years in authority, his presence was heavy before he even said a word. The name tag read Officer Reynolds. His face was locked in a stern expression, eyes hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses. Marcus swallowed, keeping his breathing steady. "License and registration," the officer said, his tone sharp. No greeting. No explanation, just straight to business. Marcus nodded, moving slowly as he reached into the pocket of his leather jacket. "It's in my wallet," he said, making sure to narrate his actions. "I'm grabbing it now." Reynolds didn't respond, he just watched, hand resting near his holster. Marcus pulled out his wallet and handed over his ID and registration. The officer snatched them away without looking at him, taking his time as he scanned the details. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. "You live around here?" Reynolds finally asked, flipping the ID between his fingers. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Couple blocks over." Reynolds scoffed, shaking his head like he didn't believe it. "This your bike?" Marcus clenched his jaw. He'd been through this before. "Yes, sir. It's registered in my name." Reynolds let out a low chuckle, but there was nothing friendly about it. He took a slow step closer, tilting his head. "You sure about that?" Marcus frowned, shifting slightly in his seat. "Yes, you have the registration in your hand." Reynolds ignored him, glancing back at his patrol car before speaking into his radio. "Dispatch. Run a check on a black male, late 20s, on a black motorcycle plate number." Marcus' stomach tightened. He knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just a routine stop. This was something else. Minutes passed. The radio crackled back. "No warrants, no violations, everything checks out." Marcus almost let out a breath of relief, almost. But Reynolds? He didn't look satisfied. If anything, he looked annoyed. "You been drinking?" the officer asked, taking a step closer. Marcus shook his head. "No, sir." "You got drugs on you?" "No, sir." Reynolds tapped the bike's gas tank. "Mind if I check?" Marcus hesitated. He knew his rights. He didn't have to let this officer search anything without cause. But he also knew how quickly things could go south. "I'd rather not," Marcus said, his voice even. Reynolds let out a low whistle, like Marcus had just made a big mistake. He stepped back, hand resting fully on his holster now. "You refusing a lawful order?" Marcus' heart pounded. His hands gripped the handlebars a little tighter. This was the moment where things could spiral, where a normal ride home could turn into something else entirely. And then, just when the tension was thick enough to snap, a voice cut through the air. "Is there a problem here, officer?" A woman stood a few feet away, phone in hand, recording. She wasn't alone. A small group had started to gather, neighbors, pedestrians, people watching from across the street. The atmosphere had shifted. Reynolds stiffened, glancing at the growing crowd. His grip on his belt loosened just slightly. Marcus exhaled, his pulse still hammering. And just like that, the balance of power shifted. But what happened next? That was something no one saw coming. Marcus felt the shift in the air. The weight of the moment pressing down on him was suddenly shared by the people watching. It was no longer just him, alone with a badge and a gun. It was him and the eyes of the public. And Reynolds felt it too. The officer's jaw tightened. He adjusted his belt again, shifting his stance. The confidence he had just moments ago, when he was the only one in control, seemed to falter slightly. He glanced at the woman holding the phone, then at the others who had stopped to watch. Some had their arms crossed, others whispered among themselves, their expressions tense and unreadable. Marcus stayed silent. He didn't want to push things. He didn't want to give Reynolds any excuse. But inside, his frustration burned. He had done nothing wrong. He had followed every rule. And still, here he was, suspected, questioned, treated like a criminal on the side of the road. All because he had the nerve to ride a motorcycle while being black. The woman holding the phone took a step closer. "Sir, are you detaining him?" she asked, her voice steady. Reynolds blinked behind his sunglasses. "Step back, ma'am." "I'm just asking a question," she said. "Is he free to go?" Marcus could see the muscles in Reynolds' jaw flexing. He wasn't used to being challenged, not like this. He was used to people backing down, people lowering their heads and accepting whatever he decided. But this was different. This was being watched. Another voice spoke up. A man this time, standing near a parked car. "Man, let him go. You ran his info. You know he's clean." More murmurs followed. Someone else pulled out a phone. Another person edged closer to the sidewalk, arms crossed tightly. Reynolds turned back to Marcus, as if deciding what to do next. His fingers tapped against the ticket book on his belt, like he was trying to come up with a reason to extend this stop. But he had nothing. Marcus met his gaze, his heart still pounding. He knew he had to stay calm. He had to let this moment play out the right way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Reynolds exhaled sharply. "You can go," he muttered, handing back the license and registration. Marcus took them, his fingers stiff with adrenaline. He kept his voice even. "Am I free to leave?" Reynolds' lips pressed into a thin line. He took half a step back. "Get out of here." Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He put his wallet away, started his bike, and felt the rumble beneath him. As he pulled back onto the road, the weight of a dozen eyes followed him, the silent understanding that something had just happened here, something bigger than just a traffic stop. But Marcus knew this wasn't over. Not really. Because while he rode away free for now, the feeling stayed with him, and he wasn't the only one. The video was already spreading. The woman who recorded it uploaded it before she even left the scene. Within hours, it was bouncing across social media, gathering views, comments, and outrage. People watched the way Reynolds stood over him, the way he questioned him with that unspoken accusation in his voice. They saw the hesitation in his movements when the crowd got involved. And they saw the way Marcus had to bite down his frustration just to make it out safely. By the next morning, the city was talking. Marcus woke up to his phone buzzing nonstop, texts, missed calls, notifications lighting up his screen. He rubbed his eyes, blinking at the messages. "Bro, you're all over Twitter. Is this you in this video? Man, people are past AT. You gotta say something." He sat up, the memories of the night before crashing back in. He pulled up the link someone had sent him, his stomach twisting as he watched himself on screen. The clip wasn't long, but it said everything. The way Reynolds leaned over him, the way his hand hovered near his holster, the way the tension only broke when others got involved. The comments were exploding. "This is why we don't trust cops. He was just riding his bike. Why was this necessary?" That officer was looking for a reason, plain and simple. But there were other comments too, ones that made Marcus' blood boil. If he just cooperated, there wouldn't be a problem. "We don't see what happened before the recording started. Maybe he deserved to be stopped." Not everything is about race. Marcus exhaled slowly, closing his eyes for a second. He had seen this before. Stories like this happened all the time, but this time, it was him in the center of it. And then, another message popped up. A name he recognized. "Marcus, this is Angela Thomas from Channel 8 News. We'd like to speak with you about the incident. Please call me when you can." Marcus stared at the message. The news? It had already reached the news. He felt his pulse pick up. He wasn't sure if he wanted this, if he wanted to be the face of this kind of story. But whether he wanted it or not, it was already happening. And across town, Officer Reynolds sat at his desk, scrolling through the same video. His jaw was tight, his fingers drumming against the desk. Because while the world saw a cop harassing an innocent man, he saw something else. He saw his name being dragged. He saw his authority being questioned. And more than anything, he saw a storm coming his way. Marcus stared at his phone, the reporter's message still glowing on the screen. His mind raced. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't asked for any of it. But now, the story had taken on a life of its own, spreading far beyond that street corner where it all began. Meanwhile, Officer Reynolds sat in his precinct, jaw clenched as he scrolled through the flood of comments under the viral video. Every few seconds, his phone buzzed. Messages from colleagues, a call from his superior, even a few reporters trying to reach him. The department was under pressure now, and he could feel it closing in on him. By noon, the news had picked up the story. Local stations ran segments, playing the footage over and over, dissecting every second. Was this racial profiling? Was the officer abusing his power? Why had he stopped Marcus in the first place? The department released a short statement, calling it a routine traffic stop, but no one was buying it. That evening, Marcus agreed to a short interview. He hadn't wanted to, but the more he saw the video spreading, the more he realized something. This wasn't just about him anymore. He needed to say something. Not just for himself, but for every person who had been in his shoes. Sitting in front of the camera, he spoke plainly. "I was just trying to get home," he said. "I wasn't speeding. I wasn't breaking any laws. And yet, I got stopped and treated like I was guilty of something. I knew exactly what was happening, because it's happened before. And that's the problem. It happens all the time." The clip aired that night, and within hours, the backlash against the officer grew stronger. Protests began forming outside the police station, not violent, not chaotic, but loud and clear. People held signs, chanted for justice, demanded accountability. And then, the real shift happened. A second video surfaced. Someone had been across the street, recording from their car before the first video even started. This footage showed Reynolds trailing Marcus for several blocks before pulling him over. No traffic violation, no probable cause. Just an officer following a black man on a motorcycle until he found a reason to stop him. That was it, the tipping point. Under mounting pressure, the department placed Reynolds on administrative leave. The police chief made a statement calling the incident under review. But for many, that wasn't enough. The conversation had already outgrown one officer. It was now about something bigger. Marcus watched from the sidelines, stunned by how fast everything had unfolded. He hadn't set out to prove a point. He hadn't been looking for attention. But here he was in the middle of a conversation that wasn't going away. A few days later, as things continued to unfold, Marcus walked into his favorite coffee shop. The same one he had been going to for years. But this time, something was different. The barista, a woman who had served him countless times before, looked up and smiled softly. "Hey," she said. "I saw the video. I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're okay." Marcus nodded, taking in the weight of those words. Because for the first time, it wasn't just a story on the internet. It wasn't just another headline. It was real. People were paying attention. People were starting to listen. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something was finally starting to change.